You wake up in a foreign world. You are 12. Your hands are tied with rope, but not roughly, neatly, almost respectfully. This is not captivity. This is selection. On the road are Ottoman officials. One holds a parchment with a seal, devshirme, a system where the state takes Christian boys to turn them into soldiers. Not slaves, not prisoners, elites. Your father falls to his knees. Your mother doesn't cry. She's already dead inside. The neighbors are silent. Someone is envious. His son wasn't chosen. Too frail, too foolish, too pale. But you are perfect. Straight teeth, straight back, fearless gaze. A week later, you are in Anatolia. A month later, in Istanbul. A year later, you forget your name. You are called Kapı Oğlan, son of the threshold. You eat from golden dishes. You sleep in a stone barracks. You pray in Arabic. And you learn to kill silently. A paradox? Slaves were trusted more than the Sultan's sons. They had no family, so they wouldn't betray for blood. No land, so they wouldn't betray for power. But they had a sword, and discipline, and brotherhood. And this is where it gets interesting. 20 years later, you are a Janissary. The fate of the empire is in your hands. You don't just guard the palace. You decide who rules it. 37 revolts, 5 deposed sultans. You are not a rebel. You are the system. Do you know this feeling? When everything is taken from you and then everything is given. When gratitude turns into duty, duty into right, right into command. The Janissaries didn't want freedom. They wanted control. And they got it. Because the Sultan himself drilled into their heads, you are the chosen ones. And the chosen ones, sooner or later, ask, why not us? In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II ordered fire on the barracks. Artillery tore through the walls. Bodies burned. 460 years of elite, destroyed in one night, not for treason, but for success. Remember this moment. A system built on absolute loyalty always creates its own executioners, and they always wear the uniform it gave them. Spring of 1583, a village near Skopje. Milan has 3 sons, all healthy, all strong, all his pride. But when the devshirme collector, the blood tax, comes, he points to the youngest. Lazar is 12, bright eyes, straight back, steady hands. His father is silent. He squeezes a small wooden cross in his palm until it draws blood. His mother clutches a handkerchief with an embroidered name to her chest, the last thing that will remain of her son. And the neighbor, whose son stayed home, whispers to his wife, "They're lucky." Yes, lucky. Would you have done the same? If you knew, devshirme was not robbery. It was a state machine, like the IRS. Only instead of checks, it took children. Every 3 to 5 years, officials came for boys. Only Christians, only the poor, only the healthy. The rich paid, their sons were not touched. The poor prayed, to be taken. Archival tax records from Bosnia show up to 20% of families voluntarily offered their children, not out of fear, out of calculation. Sultan Murad III conceived this in the 14th century, not out of cruelty, out of cold logic. The Turkish aristocracy was a 1,000-headed serpent, each a clan, each a claimant. But a boy from a Serbian village? He had no name, no lineage, no past, only a future, carved, with a sword and written in Arabic. He was a blank slate. He could be rewritten, made loyal not to faith, not to land, not to blood, only to the Sultan. But here's what breaks the mold. The best, not to the army. They were taken to Topkapi Palace. There they learned to read, to write, to lie, to rule. They were made into viziers, ministers of the empire, governors, diplomats, shadow rulers. According to Ottoman records, by the 17th century, over 30% of high officials were devshirme recruits, including the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, a former Greek shepherd boy. Imagine, you pray for your child to be taken away, for him to forget your name, your faith, your song, because it's his only chance to escape poverty, slavery as a social elevator. And it worked better than any school. Some even bribed collectors, just to have their son taken. But selection was just the first blow, because the boy had to be reforged, completely. Soul, memory, language. For this, the Janissaries, school prisons in Anatolia. There the past was erased. The smell of native smoke replaced by the stench of barracks, the sound of a mother's prayer, by the rhythm of drums, the taste of bread, by the bitterness of obedience. Do you know this feeling? When everything is taken from you, to give you everything? When gratitude turns into duty, duty into right, right into command. Remember this moment. A system built on absolute loyalty always creates its own executioners. And they always wear the uniform it gave them. You are thrown to the floor. Stone, dampness, mold in your nostrils. No one speaks. No one looks. You are a bag of bones and fear. You try to whisper your name. Palms, the slap of a stick. Pain, like an axe in your wrist. You cry, a kick to your calves. You are given a new name, Hassan. Repeat it, again, again, until the old one becomes a strange dream. Every morning, barefoot on icy slabs. Every evening, the Quran until hoarse. Your tongue is numb, your lips cracked. You are given black bread, water, nothing more. You sleep huddled together, someone else's breath on your neck. You think, this is hell. But this is a loyalty factory. On Agaria, a school where I is erased to insert we, the Sultan. Do you know this feeling? When your body trembles but your mind is no longer yours. When every cell screams home, but home is betrayal. They don't teach you to fight here. They teach you to forget. Your native language, a crime. Your mother's prayer, a weakness. Your Christian name, a disgrace. In the Anagaria archives, not a single Serbian, Greek, Bulgarian name. Only Islamic ones, pure, obedient. Islam here is not a faith. It's an access code. You are not just a Muslim. You are the Sultan's property, above viziers, above pashas. Your blood is not yours. Your life is not yours. Everything, from him. Everything, for him. But here's the twist. You are kept in poverty, hunger, cold, beatings, not out of cruelty, out of calculation. Every piece of bread, his mercy. Every well done, his gift. This is not how a soldier is built. This is how a grateful slave is built. And gratitude is stronger than chains, until it runs out. Archaeologists in Istanbul find scraps of fabric in Janissary barracks. On them, small crosses, icons, names embroidered with trembling hands, hidden in the lining, in the soul, in the soul. The boy died, the man remained. But you cannot kill, only hide. Would you have kept your name? If for that, hunger, beatings, death. And this is where it gets interesting. When mercy ceases to be enough, when property demands a share, not bread, not praise, power, because you gave them everything, weapons, status, brotherhood. But you forgot one thing: whoever holds the sword dictates the terms, even if that sword is your gift. Remember this moment. Loyalty cultivated through gratitude always expects repayment. And repayment comes in the form of rebellion, dressed in your own uniform. You are 17. You leave the barracks for Istanbul for the first time. You wear the red kaftan of a Janissary. On your belt, a yataghan with silver inlay. In your hand, a pouch of silver, 10 times the pay of a craftsman. You walk through streets where you once had to hide your eyes. Now everyone steps aside. Merchants bow. Even Turkish officers look with respect and a slight envy. You are the elite. But you cannot marry. You cannot open a shop. You cannot inherit land. Because you are not a man. You are a tool with a golden hilt. Luxury in exchange for complete obedience. And the prohibition of a personal life is not a punishment. It is a guarantee of your purity as a weapon. The ban on marriage and crafts was not a whim. It was a brilliant mechanism of control. Without family, no heirs. Without heirs, no dynasties. Without a craft, complete dependence on the treasury. Without property, you remained the Sultan's property. Thus the Janissaries became not an army, but a state within a state. All brothers. The Sultan, father. The barracks, home. The law, the oath. At least, that was the intention. But human nature does not tolerate eternal suppression, especially when you hold a sword and have silver in your pocket. And this is where it gets interesting. By the 17th century, everything went awry. Janissaries began to marry secretly. Open shops. enroll their sons in the corps, though it was strictly forbidden. Their numbers exploded. Instead of a few thousand, there were 135,000. European envoys wrote, many didn't even pick up a weapon. They traded coffee, fabrics, spices. They controlled markets. But they retained Janissary status and the right to participate in revolts. The army turned into a giant corporation with the right to rebellion. Do you know this feeling? When you are given everything, but deprived of the right to be human. When you start using the system against itself. When the elite ceases to be an army, it becomes a threat, because it retains one thing, power. And if it no longer protects the throne, it begins to blackmail it. And then, overthrow it. Especially if its symbol is not a banner, but an overturned copper cauldron. This is not stability. This is a timer. And it has been ticking since the moment the boy was given a sword, but forbidden to love. Remember this moment. A system built on the denial of human nature always creates monsters, in its own form. You sit in the divan, the council of grand viziers. Before you is a pasha, governor of 3 provinces, and you, a former shepherd boy from the Macedonian mountains. But today, you don't ask, you approve. Without your nod, no decree leaves the palace, no tax collector enters the city, no fleet leaves the harbor. When the Grand Vizier proposes to cut the corps' pay, you stand up, silently, and leave. The next day, 135,000 Janissaries stop serving. The markets fall silent. The gates of Istanbul close. The Sultan waits. He knows this is not a revolt. This is a negotiation. Do you know this feeling? When you are not in power, but everything depends on you? The Janissaries didn't rebel aimlessly. They had a script, refined over centuries. First, silence. Then, the cauldron. An overturned copper cauldron in front of the barracks. This gesture meant more than an army at the gates. It said, the oath is broken. The Sultan is no longer father. The vizier is an enemy. And if the cauldron is not removed by dawn, the slaughter will begin. Venetian envoys wrote, the Sultan rules, but the Janissaries decide how long he will rule. This is not a metaphor. This is protocol. Archaeologists found fragments of such cauldrons in barracks excavations. Inside, traces of soot. Outside, scratches from rope. A household tool became an instrument of power. You are no longer a soldier. You are power, and you use it. You control guilds, appoint customs collectors, take seats on the council. Your voice weighs more than a decree, because behind you, a sword, and the silence of Istanbul. But in 1622, everything broke. Young Sultan Osman II, 18 years old, hot-blooded, decides, enough. He gathers a new army of Tatars and Kurds. He wants to replace you, and then the cauldron is hung not for a night, but forever. The Janissaries march to the palace, not with requests, with a verdict. Osman is dragged to Yedikule prison, to be strangled. For the first time in the history of the Ottoman Empire, a sultan is killed by his own soldiers. A slave killed his master, and at this moment the system collapses. Because if the oath is worthless, what remains? Fear? But fear is a poor foundation for an empire. Imagine you created the perfect servant. He knows your will, keeps your secrets, holds the sword for your throne, and then he looks you in the eye and asks, and why not me? Remember this moment. When a tool starts to think, it either breaks or cuts the hand that wields it. The Janissaries chose the latter, and paid for it with everything. In 1618, a boy ascended the throne. He was 14. In his eyes, not fear, not greed, fire. He saw Janissaries trading coffee instead of standing guard, how their wives wore silk bought with state money, how their sons, not shepherd boys from Janissaries, but heirs to shops in Galata. This was not an army. This was a mafia in red kaftans. Osman II decided, enough. He secretly recruited new soldiers, from Arab tribes, from Crimean Tatars, even from captured Poles. He wanted an army like the Habsburgs, disciplined, without revolts, without cauldrons. But he hadn't read the archives. He didn't know. The Janissaries were not part of the system. They were the system itself. Their barracks were a stone's throw from the throne. Their informants in every mosque, in every coffee house, in the divan itself. When Osman ordered an expedition to Poland to distract the Janissaries from the capital, they knew, before the order left the pen. Imagine you build a bomb to destroy terrorists, and they are already sitting in your headquarters and reading your blueprints. In May 1622, the Janissaries marched to the palace, not with swords, not with shouts, with silence. Their cauldron had been hanging over the gates for a week. No one had removed it. That meant the oath was broken. Osman was seized in the harem. He was 18. He was dragged down the marble steps where he played as a child. Down, into the dungeons of Yedikule. It smelled of dampness and fear. 2 Janissaries held his arms. A third, with a silk scarf. By custom, royal blood is not shed. They strangled him, slowly, until his eyes rolled back, until his heart stopped. Do you know this feeling? When you are the master, and you are killed by those you fed from your own plate? This was not murder. This was a verdict, and it read, "The Sultan is not God. He is temporary, and if he breaks the rules, he will be erased, like an error in an accounting ledger." The divan archives were silent for 3 days after Osman's death. Then a new decree appeared. Janissary pay increased. Privileges confirmed. Reforms forgotten. Remember this moment. A reform that doesn't consider who holds the sword is not a reform. It is slow-motion suicide. Osman X died because he thought he commanded an army, but in reality, the army commanded him. And it had just proven, even Allah's anointed is expendable if he hinders the system. Now the Janissaries knew they could do anything, and no one would dare touch them, a mistake for which the empire would pay for another century and a half, until Sultan Mahmud decided better to burn everything than to live captive to one's own slaves. Istanbul, mid-18th century. Morning bazaar. The smoke from coffee mingles with the scent of cinnamon. Behind the counter, Mehmed. He wears a Janissary jacket with gold embroidery. In his hands, scales for sugar, not a sword. His sword hangs on the wall, an antique shop decoration. He never stood in formation, never heard the whistle of bullets near Vienna, but he is a Janissary because his father paid an official 200 akçe just to put his name on the list, bypassing the Anagaria, the school where memory was erased, bypassing Islam, the access code to power. Now Mehmed collects protection fees from his neighbors, and every Friday he signs the list. That very list. His weapon. Not steel. Paper. Do you know this feeling? When a title is more important than deeds. When form is everything, and content is emptiness. The Janissaries ceased to be an army. They became a mafia with a license for violence. First, they were allowed crafts, for the spirit. Then shops, for sustenance. Then, to pass on their status by inheritance. And the Devshirme system, the blood tax, where Christian boys were taken to make them elite, turned into a farce. According to Ottoman tax records, Janissaries controlled 60% of small trade in the capital. The corps numbered 135,000. Real soldiers, 5,000, maybe 7. The rest, merchants, moneylenders, underworld bosses. But all had the right to take up arms. All could overturn the cauldron. All, a voice in the council. Archaeologists excavated the barracks in 1998. 80% of the items, not military. Needles, scales, coffee mortars. But not powder flasks, not cartridge belts, not sharpening stones. This was not a soldier's camp. This was a market warehouse. And here's a shocking detail. Many Janissaries of the late 18th century didn't even know where they were from. Their names, fictitious. Ahmed from Bosnia, Mustafa from Albania. But in reality, born in Istanbul, in families of tailors, cobblers, coffee makers. Their documents, forged. The seal carved by a local engraver for a bag of coffee. The rich paid 500 kurush, and their son received status without an oath, without Islam, without pain, without fear. This was not a draft. This was a business. Imagine you buy the right to be a police officer, without attending the academy, without knowing the laws, but with a badge and a pistol, and the right to arrest those who don't pay you tea-money. The threat no longer came from the borders. It drank coffee at Etmedana, sat in the divan, demanded more, and the empire was silent, because it was afraid. But patience ran out. The sultans realized this army was not protecting the throne. It was strangling it. And when reforms were discussed, they no longer asked for permission. They prepared for war, not with Austria, not with Persia, but with those who wore their uniform, and had long forgotten why it was given. Remember this moment, when the elite turns into a caste. It stops serving and begins to parasitize, and parasites are burned out. June 1826, Istanbul. Pre-dawn silence. Fog envelops the minarets like an ash shroud. A copper cauldron is carried out of the barracks, overturned, placed at the gates. A signal, a rebellion. Would you believe this was the last time? That in 2 hours the cauldron would be melted down, that those who raised it would become ash, nameless, graveless, unmourned. The Janissaries wait, as always. They wait for a trembling vizier. They wait for concessions. They wait for fear. But instead of pleading, a rumble. Deep. Growing. Artillery from the hills of Beyoğlu, loaded with grape shot. Sultan Mahmud II doesn't negotiate. He set a trap. A new army, the fire brigades, had trained for years in the shadows. The ulama issued a fatwa. The Janissaries are rebels against Allah's will. The barracks are surrounded on 3 sides. The Bosphorus is blocked by gunboats. There is no escape. The first cannonball tears through the crowd at Etmedana. The second blasts open the barracks doors. The third sets the straw bunks ablaze. People burn alive, not as soldiers, as trash. Do you know this feeling? When your uniform is your death sentence? When your loyalty is your shame? 4,000 bodies in 48 hours, according to official reports. In reality, more. Many more. The survivors are led to Yedikule. There they are strangled with a silk scarf, like Osman II. The cyclical nature of history, executioners become victims. But worse than blood, erasure. Archives burned, names deleted. In the lists of the dead, only numbers. Not Lazar from Skopje, not Mehmed the coffee maker. Just 137, 205, 882. The Ottoman Empire did not kill the Janissaries. It erased them from memory, like a virus from a system. The auspicious incident. That's what they called the massacre. There's your propaganda. Imagine you are erased not from life, from history. Your mother embroidered your name on a handkerchief. Your father squeezed a cross until it bled. And now you are nobody. Only ash in a ditch near Topkapi. And yet, it was necessary. The Janissaries became a tumor. They were strangling the empire from within. They were removed to let it breathe. A year later, a new army was born. Asakir-i Mansura-i Mohammediye. European uniforms, modern rifles, no cauldrons. But the price? 460 years. Generations of boys torn from their mothers. A system that created angels and turned them into demons. Remember this moment. When loyalty becomes a business, it is burned. When the elite forgets why it was given a sword, the sword is turned against it. Would you have kept the Janissaries? If you knew, they would either kill the reforms or be destroyed by them. There was no choice, only fire, and silence afterward. Do you know this feeling? When you are broken, to be reassembled, but not with the right pieces. Here it is, the paradox that killed the empire. The sultans created the Janissaries and Anagaries, school prisons where boys were forced to forget their native language under threat of whips. Their name, faith, memory were erased. Instead of a mother, drums. Instead of bread, the Quran until hoarse. And it worked, until it didn't. Because loyalty torn from the roots of will is not loyalty. It is a debt. and debt demands repayment. Like in the Stanford prison experiment, put on the uniform, and you are no longer you. Only here, the uniform gave the right to decide who lives and who dies. The Janissaries didn't just guard the throne, they chose who would sit on it. 5 sultans, overthrown. 37 revolts, asserted as a right. All because the system gave them a sword, but forgot to take away their minds. Imagine Hassan. He is 10. Snow on the apple trees. Mother screams. Father is silent. He is taken to Anatolia. There he is forced to repeat Allahu Akbar until his native name becomes a strange dream. 20 years later he stands in the Divan, the Council of Ministers. He wears a golden jacket. In his eyes, ice. And when young Osman II tries to remove the Janissaries, Hassan, perhaps, holds that very silk scarf. Not out of hatred, out of loyalty to the core, the only family he was left with. And a century and a half later, ash. Mahmud II's artillery tears through the barracks. Bodies burn. Archives on fire. Names erased. Only numbers remain: 137, 205, 882. A slave who became a master who became a target. Can absolute loyalty be created? History answers no, because any system that breaks personality for obedience sooner or later cultivates not a servant, but an executioner. And the executioner wears the same uniform he was given as a child. The Ottoman historian Nesri wrote in the 15th century, "He who forges a sword from a slave, sooner or later will be struck by it." The Janissaries are a mirror. They reflected not the strength of the empire, but its blindness. Would you have kept your name, if for that, hunger, beatings, death, or would you have taken the sword and demanded the throne? So think about it. Victims or traitors? Write in the comments, victims or traitors.